You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Well, welcome, world, to the premiere episode of Upstream with Cashill and Edge. I'm Jack Cashill, and I am joined here today by
Loy Edge here.
The inimitable Loy Edge, as he's known wide and far.
Don't try to imitate me, because it won't work.
It will not. People have tried, and they've all failed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, first, I think we should explain why the title Upstream. And in short, it comes from a quote by the late, great Andrew Breitbart that politics is downstream from culture. All politics is downstream from culture. We will leave politics per se to lesser mortals. We will go upstream to the culture, where the culture resides. And that way, we can avoid the trap of having to do daily updates on, polls and election results and who's doing what to whom in Washington, and concentrate on the larger forces that make that political apparatus work or not work as it is. Now, you knew Andrew, correct, Mr. Breitbart?
Yes, that's right, Mr. Cashill. I met Andrew in Los Angeles in probably, I think it was the last half of the, what was it? It was the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I was part of a large underground conservative kind of maybe Republican, Libertarian, et cetera group out there that was kind of a...
And what was the name of that? Didn't you have a name that you went by, or was it...
I think it's... I may still get in trouble for talking about it.
Oh, okay. Well, you can't talk about it, but I heard of it called Friends of Abe, and I was not a part of it.
Well, how'd you know? But it was a pretty large group, a lot of fun. Andrew was a constant presence there. He always had something to say. We'd have lunches, and frankly, people were like, "Oh God, we got to listen to Andrew again." But I loved it. I mean, he had a lot of great things to say.
I met him for the first time. Before that, I was out in California promoting my book, What's the Matter with California? And I would guess the year was about 2006. And he was filling in on a national Saturday show. And we were in Burbank. I think we were at Disney Studios. And it was this giant monolithic kind of Stalinist enterprise that was, I took me a half hour to find my way into the building. And he was guest hosting. He was not familiar with this. And in the late 90s, I did daily talk radio. So I knew how to push the buttons. I knew how to get in and out of shows and whatnot. And Andrew was, at that time, I never would have guessed that he would have emerged 5 years later as the culture force he emerged as. Because then he was pretty insecure, and certainly about running the radio show. And
he found a lot of guts somewhere.
Yeah, he did.
Because he was dauntless.
He was incredible. He redefined, in a sense, how conservatives should act in the world. Oh, yeah. And that's with chutzpah, bravado, cojones, call it what you will, But he's the spiritual father of a Carrie Lake or a Ron DeSantis or even Donald Trump.
Yep, he was delightful. He was a lot of fun. We'd have beers at Barney's Beanery afterwards, or they'd have events there. And he was constantly, I loved his point of view. He hated school just like I did. He was terrible at it.
Well, he went to school in New Orleans, so there's so many distractions there. Why bother, right?
Yeah. And his father-in-law was often there.
That was Orson Bean.
Orson Bean.
Right.
Who, if you grew up seeing this strange character, Orson Bean, on TV like I did back in the 60s.
Right. He 70s. Was like a guest on virtually every panel show there was.
For no reason.
Right.
There he was. And here's Orson Bean.
And to tell the truth today is Orson Bean. Or what's my line? Here's Orson Bean.
And he's kind of the wacky, off-the-wall, Dick Shawn kind of liberal kind of, perspective. Right. And the last thing you'd expect the last person you'd expect to see at one of these deals would be this guy, but he was singing from the same hymnal.
Right. He was the father-in-law. I mean, Andrew married his daughter, and in his book, in Andrew's book, Righteous Indignation, he gives tons of credit to Orson Bean for helping him become who he was.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And I got a sense of the Breitbart character personally because in 2008, I introduced the thesis that Bill Ayers was maybe the primary ghostwriter for Barack Obama's book, Dreams from My Father.
I remember that.
And in the summer of 2008 rather, I picked up Dreams from My Father. I hadn't read it up to that point. I really wasn't interested in reading it, but I was caught in the Detroit airport, right? And there was a delay. And I went into the bookstore, and it was like an Obama-Rama bookstore. I mean, there was coloring books. There was all kinds of books about every kind of conceivable book about Barack Obama. So I said,
Shocking.
I'll bite the bullet. I'll buy the book. I'll read the book. I'm about 20 pages into the book, and I said to myself, he didn't write this book.
Yeah.
I've seen him speak. I've seen his writings. This is beyond his capability. And I wrote about that in the summer of 2008, and I said, who wrote Dreams from My Father? I was just curious. And so I started Googling around trying to find key phrases that match someplace, and I wasn't making much headway. And then I found a couple of key phrases that seemed like they matched a poet who lived in the West Coast someplace. And I knew I couldn't communicate with this person and say, hey, did you write Dream for My Father? Because he'd Google me, and he'd know immediately that I was not a person that he'd want to talk to.
Exactly.
But my webmaster at the time was female who used a San Francisco State University, URL or address, email address. And so I had her do it, right? And so she emails him and says, hey, Joe, great work on the Obama book, right? Just
Oh,
out of the blue.
sneaky bastard.
And then, but his response was so innocent. I knew he was not the person, the culprit involved. And he said, no, it's not me. I wish I would. I'd be proud to say I did. He's a great guy. Blah, blah, blah. So no, that was a false lead. It was based on insufficient information. So then in about August or September, I followed another lead on another story, and we could talk about that some other time. And I said, I really had to pick up Bill Ayers' book because I wanted to see if Obama and Ayers had known each other in New York. So I picked up a copy of Ayers' memoir, Fugitive Days, and it's very well written. It's crazy, but it's well written. And I'm about a third of the way into Fugitive Days, and I said, bingo, here it is.
You picked up the patterns.
I said, my gosh. I said, my life would be so much easier right now if the ghostwriter had been anyone other than Bill Ayers. Because then I could go to a place like National Review or Weekly Standard, and I can make the argument that, that, hey, listen, he's not the literary genius we think he is. He's got a ghostwriter here. But if it's Bill Ayers, they don't want to touch it.
Right.
And that's what happened. So I went from Weekly Standard, for whom I used to write. National Review turned me down. Everyone turned me down. I thought I had to deal with the American Spectator. Then they turned me down. I said I need at least 3,500 words to make my case, because I'm comparing, phrases and
You
words.
found nautical references and obscure things, and I remember
one of the keys was
connecting all those dots.
Right, that Bill Ayers was a member of was in the Merchant Marines for a year. He was on not a merchant marine, but he was on a merchant ship. He worked for a year. It was probably pretty traumatizing. That's got to be a daunting task on a big international open liner. And so his book is filled with nautical references. I found 53 matching nautical references between Dreams from My Father and Fugitive Days. And these are used metaphorically, the inlet of her eyes, or, all these, the great panorama of life, all these kind of things. And so I finally, I went to American Thinker. People say, hey, have you tried American Thinker? It was an online publication. And I said, I didn't even hear of it, but I went online. They gave me the space. Next day, Rush Limbaugh is talking about it on air. We're 4 weeks out before the election. If this story breaks, it could turn the election, right? Mm-hmm. It was my one moment where I was close to shaping history. And then what happened is it sort of reminds me of the old Randy Travis song. I may be butchering the lyrics. It goes, "Is it over? Are we through? If my phone still ain't ringing, can I assume it still ain't you?" Rush Limbaugh talks about me for 10 minutes, talks about the thesis for 10 minutes. I get not a single phone call from anyone.
Crazy.
And not on the left, not on the right, not anyone. And then when I tried to move it forward, totally turned down by the right. I didn't even bother with the mainstream media. I knew they didn't want to know this. It got turned down by everyone. And then there were only two people who came to my defense. One was Andy McCarthy of National Review. And as soon as he did, he got totally shot down. Got called a racist, this, that, and the other thing. And the other one was Andrew Breitbart. And he did it on the Bill Maher show. And then again, of course, he was called a racist, you know. And then he did it again on that show with some other Indian guy. Used to be on CNBC or MSNBC. I forget his name. And again, the same thing. Racist, 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 racist. How dare you say that, you know? But that's the world we live in. That's the culture that shapes us. And I think, and part of the theme of our show is if you understand the culture, you can understand what's going to happen downstream from it. So,
well, I think probably most people listening to this know about Bill Ayers, but you just brought up maybe a little background on that might be helpful because
that's right.
Because for that to go under the radar like that, it's just astounding.
Well, you know, in fact, David Remnick, who was an Obama biographer, he's the editor of the New Yorker, right? Obviously, very influential guy. He had conceded in his Obama biography, The Bridge, that, and of course he called me a racist, he called Rush Limbaugh a racist, et cetera. He said, what could our motives have been other than racism? And I wanted to say to him, what could the motives have been of the 4,000 scholars who've been arguing that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare? Was that racism, you know? No. And so he said, and here's what he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was close. He goes, if this had been true, or even if enough people had believed it were true, that Bill Ayers, the unrepentant terrorist, the radical Weather Underground bomber, and Barack Obama were collaborators on this book, it would have meant the end of Obama's campaign. He conceded that, which is why I understood the left to want nothing to do with this story other than to scare everyone away from it by calling them racist.
Yes.
But the right, that was an education for me.
Yeah, that is shocking. That's kind of what was said about the big lie, if it's big enough, if it's bold enough, if it's crazy enough.
The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it because they think that no one could conceivably tell a lie that big.
That would be impossible.
Right.
The Weather Underground, that they were terrorists.
Yeah,
by
right.
any definition.
Yeah, and what was Bill Ayers karma caught up with Bill Ayers on September 11, 2001, because his book, The Fugitive Days, had just come out, right?
Okay.
And they had great plans for it. It's a good read, you know, because it talks about 10 years on the underground and, you know, all these, you know, wild sex orgies and identity theft and all that kind of things, bombing and whatnot. But the New York Times does a glowing review that comes out on the morning of September 11th, 2001, right? So for 2 or 3 hours, Bill Ayers is probably in hog heaven. Wow, we got this great review in the New York Times about what, and he said, I didn't do enough when it comes to terrorism, right?
Yeah.
And then by 9:12 a.m., his career was in free fall, right? I mean, it was, a deserved moment.
Oh, yeah.
But nonetheless, a moment of unfortunate moment that we, as a culture, were unable to come to terms with what was an obvious bit of a fraud. There's lots of it around.
Huge story right before the election.
Right. Killed.
Kind of reminds you of a little laptop action.
Yeah, right, honestly.
I mean, what do they? What's the Orwellian term for that?
Memory hole.
Memory hole.
Yeah.
There you
and
go.
memory hold it before it even became a chance to become a memory for most people, right?
That's right.
And that speaks to where we are with the culture, because you saw what happened then. And this is we don't need, most people remember this in the fall of 2020. I remember it well because I was driving across the country when that story broke. And I said, my gosh, it's just what we needed. We're 3 weeks before the election.
Yeah.
This is going to be hard to recover from. And then they colluded. I don't think they've ever, we have these various forces that shape our culture.
Yeah.
And you know what they are. I mean, there was big tech. There was the mainstream. Forget the word mainstream media. That word is outdated.
The propaganda media.
Right.
The propaganda machine. It's,
Right.
It's pervasive.
And they conspired with the intel community, of course, the Democrats.
Academia.
Right, academia. And they all conspire. In fact, I remember that day thinking, you know what is a bigger story than the Hunter Biden laptop is the conspiracy to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah.
Now,
And that's saying something because there were some whoppers in that baby.
honestly,
I mean, direct payoffs to the big guy. And
The big
I
guy,
mean,
right.
come on.
Right.
You talk about an existential threat to the nation.
Right.
By the way, don't tell anybody, but I don't think we've dealt with this yet.
I don't think so. What's interesting, too, is you use the phrase big guy, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you and I know what the phrase big guy means. Mm-hmm. For half of America, that
They
phrase
don't know.
has no meaning whatsoever.
No meaning. They're not hearing it.
Right.
Not only is there not an echo chamber for this stuff, but there's a baffle that is amazing.
It is. I mean, that word of these events is not allowed to leave the room, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what happened with the Bill Ayers, Barack Obama phenomenon over time, and again, I herald Andrew Breitbart for being the one person on TV with the nerve to talk about it, is that it snuck out over time, right? Mm-hmm. So now most people say, oh, yeah, I know that Bill Ayers.
Right. I've heard it acknowledged by people that I have no association with, or you have no association with.
And people wouldn't have talked to me in October and November of 2008, when it mattered. So,
how do they do that? I mean, that is a phenomenon that I've seen happen so many times when things get backdoor mainstreamed. It's like, how do you bust into popular knowledge where people are making references to it, and everyone's just like, oh, yeah, we do that all the time. How does it go from complete dead silence to, oh, by the way, and then they always just don't look like, yeah, well, you remember when we found, Bill Ayers, who wrote Obama's book, blah, 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 on and on. It's like, wait a minute, hold the presses here.
Right.
When did people start believing this?
And I've done podcasts or radio shows, whatever, and the people tell me, did you know that Bill Ayers helped Barack Obama?
Yeah.
Oh, he did. That's interesting. And my name is never attached to this.
No.
But that's all right. I get it. But
it's not all right, Jack. It's one of the many huge things that you've done that no one appreciates.
Well, I think you and I, Loy, through this podcast, we will finally be discovered.
Will we?
Yeah, I think so. I think the world will say, how could we have kept these two bright lights in the closet for so long when they should be bursting out across the mainstream? So tell me more about Hollywood, just in terms of, you were there, you had an inside look at it. Is there something that people ought to know that they don't even suspect now? Is it darker than we think, or?
Oh, yeah. Of course it is. I may be the only person in this country who's ever referred to you as Pollyanna.
That's you have that
distinction.
Distinction, right?
All right, you. Things are so much darker than any of us think.
Right.
And that and my Hollywood experience, I was 11 years out there. I went out in 2000. I left Kansas City.
Yeah.
To do voiceover cartoon characters and things like that. I wound up staying for 11 years.
And you were in a few movies too, weren't you?
Yep, films. When you're in L.A., it's easy to get in films and things like that because people go, oh, you know, I got a character in something I'm working on. Loy, you'd work for that. You'd be that. And I'd be, okay, whatever.
Sure, right.
So, I mean, you got to be there. But,
Right.
So there's a lot of that going on. Right? The voiceover world is a bunch of old actors, a bunch of old producers and announcers and game show hosts, people that you'd recognize from your youth who are sitcom people.
Right.
You're all waiting around for your script.
Right.
Or you've got your scripts, but you're waiting around for your booth time. And I was at William Morris Agency, and it's a big room, and it was like it was like an AA cocktail party every day. You know, there was no booze, but everybody milling around just yakking.
Uh-huh.
And it was a wonderful experience. But I will tell you, maybe 30% of the people in there were what we'll call, for the sake of this discussion, conservatives.
Right.
And 70% were a different brand of liberal or leftist than you even get anywhere else, I think, in the country, because they were just very creative, imaginative,
Right.
Cuckoo people.
Right.
And that was but fortunately, my agent, which is really weird being at William Morris Agency, which is kind of the belly of the beast.
Right.
When Barack Obama visits L.A., first stop, William Morris Agency.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
the money is there.
Yeah.
But he was right of center, and there were so we could speak freely.
William Morris himself, or
No,
your agent.
The agent.
And what was the agent's name?
No, I ain't gonna say that.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. When you want to keep not worry about your job. Now your life isn't all.
No, I'm worried about him. Anyway, no.
Oh, you're right. You could kill his career, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, we could speak out, and so and we did.
Right.
Everybody. There were no sacred cows. People talked about everything in there, and so I got a good insight on exactly how bizarre the whole vision was. I mean, I heard the terms what was I, a global warming denier way back.
Before it was cool.
Before it was cool to be called a denier. and so all these terms. But I forget where I'm going with this, but was it darker? Yeah, it was. It was really weird. And I was out there during the 9/11 attack.
Right.
And I was writing and producing for one of the networks as a part-time gig. I would go in the night shift, and I would write and produce network promos. And these were for kid shows.
Right.
And after 9/11, one of the weirdest things that happened was they made us go back in to all these promos that we'd done and take out all the gunshots and all the violence
Right.
and anything that was an explosion.
Right.
We had to take it out and then somehow make it work. And that was really bizarre.
I can imagine. A comparable moment occurred, and speaking of culture, when at the day before the Tonys Awards, and this was probably about 2015, some bizarre Muslim went to the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that was weird.
Killed 50-something people, and he used a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if he had used a bomb, the cast of Hamilton would have had to do something differently, but they had already practiced. Hamilton was going to be the big award winner that year.
Mm-hmm.
And they had already practiced their, marching thing drill on the stage, as all part of the deal. And so they did it without their muskets. And what that allowed them to do was to transfer the blame from a Muslim conspiracy or their hatred of homosexuals to known loathing of homosexuals by radical Muslims and even moderate Muslims to guns, right?
Right.
Just this cultural maneuver, just like with 9/11. Take out the bad sounds,
Yes.
and everything's okay.
Yeah, and then if you notice in cartoons, ever since then, no characters will shoot or kid shows of any kind. Nobody shoots anybody. They shoot something and it falls out of a tree and hits them on the head and goes gong.
Right.
I mean, just all kinds of weird machinations to try to get those bad sounds and those bad things out of there.
Someone should have told that to Alec Baldwin. He'd be a little
I
bit
know.
rough today, you know.
He just didn't pay attention. But yeah, the people in the media machine making those promos for kids, that was enlightening because I noticed a lot of the people who were doing the promos. There was a kids cartoon show based on ancient Egypt. And I was new to it, and I went in there, and I had to watch all this stuff, and it was painful watching things like Pokemon, and it was just, I'm
Right.
a Warner Brothers cartoon guy. I went out there to do.
Give me a voice, by the way.
Now I'll say, listen, Jack. No, I can't do that. It's just not. Well, I'm being sick. No, I can't do that because I get in
Flashbacks.
trouble.
Yeah, okay.
You get in trouble for that. And never mind. But what happened was where was I? I was doing a kids. What did they do?
Kids, voiceover or?
Blacked out on that one. But anyway.
Yeah, we'll come back to it.
Yeah. But you could. Oh, I know what it was. We were talking about the mummy and all these things, and I was kind of new to that. And I'm like, well, what if this character goes over and I got a character's name wrong, and these nerds that were in there knew all about the ancient religion.
Right.
They went deep
Yeah.
based on this program about all the gods and their power and Osiris and this and this and this. And I'm like, this is shocking. These guys don't know anything about anything.
Right.
They've still got action figures on their shelves.
Yeah.
These are grown men with action figures and stuff all around them. But yet they knew the dark, spiritual, religious qualities of all this ancient Egyptian stuff. And it kind of dawned on me later that this is the stuff they're seriously implanting in kids' minds.
Right. And in the absence of any real culture.
Right.
And in the absence of any real understanding of what American culture is or should be, right? And without any sense of our Judeo-Christian background.
No, they were making them into pagans of some bizarre.
Right.
I mean,
And into that emptiness, you could put just virtually anything. You can convince a boy that he's a girl or a girl that he's a
That's
boy.
right.
You can't convince a white kid that he's black. That gets you in trouble. But you can convince him that he's a female. You know what I mean? So
that's right. And really, that's kind of the battle that we see right now is there's a battle between natural law and constitutional thought,
Right.
and then moral relativism and secular humanism.
Right.
And people, and those two forces are really at loggerheads right now because of the exposure of so many things.
That's right. Now, because we have so many more sources now. What happened is that, for years, I was just watching the other day, and this is, I was very, I think it's the best war movie ever made, which is Saving Private Ryan. Mm-hmm. And it comes to the end of the movie. It's a really poignant scene. I was a little bit verklempt myself, I must say, when watching it. And this is right after Captain John Miller, the Tom Hanks character, he's been shot. He's dying. And he's shooting at the tank, futilely trying to stop it. And then there's a Deus Ex Machina, the American planes come and bomb tanks, and they're saved. And so then James Ryan, played by Matt Damon, comes over and says, can I help? I'm trying to help him, trying to save him. And then he whispers to him. He whispers these words. You remember what he whispers to him?
No.
James, earn this. Earn it, right? So fast forward 80 years, and we have to ask ourselves, what they handed us after World War II was the most prosperous, most powerful, most secure civilization in the history of the world, easily.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And I think, we have to ask our audience, and they should ask their children or friends, what have you done to earn this, right?
Mm-hmm.
What have you done to preserve this? And as you rightly say, those of us who are working to preserve it are working against a force that is, you would say, demonic, and I would say it's very nearly demonic, right? I being a Pollyanna.
Well, what a lot of people do to earn it, Jack, is they put a yard sign out.
That's it. Right.
That's pretty good.
This household believes in love is love.
That's right.
Science is real, except when, we're talking about COVID or climate change or DNA or whatever.
We got to do a show on those yard signs because implicit in all those yard signs is, and you're not.
That's right. They're smug and insulting, and they don't even get that. Or some of them do.
Well, yeah.
I have a very sweet cousin, and this when they started putting these yard signs out about 2 or 3 years ago, I took a photo of one, and I said, I forget what I commented on it. She goes, "But Jack, I have one of those yard signs." She didn't know what their implicit message was, which was, we are morally superior to you, right? No, hate is not tolerated in this house. Mm-hmm. That's a hateful
Unlike
sign.
yours.
Right, that's right. That is a hateful sign, right? Hate is not tolerated. I mean, we go back to virtue signaling. In the absence of having real culture, in the absence of believing anything.
That's right.
It was the country western song. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that's where we are. I mean, we could get into this in another show, another episode, but in the absence of believing anything, in this past 2-3 years, the stupidest years in American history, 2020 gets top billing on that. Stupidest year in American history.
Well, that's a good one, yeah.
But you have 5 major manias sweeping across the country that 10 years ago no one would, we're groveling at the altar of the black market, of the Marxist market, black marketers who run Black Lives Matter. We're playing Chicken Little before COVID. We're deciding that it's a good thing to cut the breast off teenage girls and to castrate boys. It's a good thing to allow men to compete against girls in sports.
Right.
And
it's fair.
And it's essential that we sacrifice the world's economy to make sure that the climate is not a half a degree warmer a century from now. That's how.
Moral relativism, secular humanism.
Right. But there's no hate in these houses. So that's the battle we have.
One of my favorites was I was on a little weekend road trip and it was not hooked into media. I came back home and started listening and I noticed right away everybody had Ukrainian flags up.
Right.
Their identity.
Right.
They had taken their little identities
right.
in the social media and replaced it with a picture of them with a flag like FDR or something, right. But it was the wrong flag. It was the Ukrainian flag. And I'm thinking, Ukraine, what in the hell is going on? I mean, if you know a lot about Ukraine, it's hard to imagine anybody going, I stand with Ukraine. It's like, last time I saw that many pictures with the word Ukraine on it, it was when I was looking at my stamp collection with Adolf Hitler and it said Ukraine across it because that was their postage stamps in World War II. But
let bygones be bygones.
Let bygones be bygones. Those Nazis have all got to be gone.
Right.
But it was just unbelievable how quickly those people with the empty hole, whatever that, the God hole or whatever it is, it's so empty with no, as you say, no fundamental principles that have been, no inculcation into
a coherent worldview. I mean, and the civilization that we've inherited, they choose not to know about, and they react so instinctively, not instinctively at all. They react so sheepishly to the propaganda that's being fed them. I'll give you even a better example than Ukrainian flags. I have a neighbor who had, of course, a Black Lives Matter thing. As the old joke goes, I remember talking about this with you back in the day. After COVID hits in March and then George Floyd stuff hits in May, and And the cartoon goes, I haven't even taken down my COVID decorations
Yes.
yet, right? You know?
Yeah.
Well, here was the quickest instant mania that swept through that world. Some crazy kid in Georgia goes berserk, he's right out of Flannery O'Connor. He wants to take revenge on the masseuses who've, corrupted him, right?
Right.
Most of whom were Asian. That's their business.
Mm-hmm.
And not all, but most. And then immediately my neighbor has the Black Lives Matter sign, and next to it is the Stop Asian Hate sign.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
But then it became obvious that the people who were hating on Asians and beating Asians and killing Asians were people of color, right? And so that mania lasted for about a month of video clips being played over and over.
I remember that. It's just crazy. That it's funny to quickly. One recently to when we're doing this show is the Paul Pelosi incident.
Yeah.
That immediately, when something crazy like that happens, it may be Schadenfreude. I love to watch MSNBC and CNN and NPR because I just love to hear the crazy spin.
Right. And they do it shamelessly.
Shamelessly.
Yeah.
If you could have seen Mika talking about how Donald Trump himself did this with that hammer. I mean, he was holding that hammer. It was the craziest thing.
I'm going to give you another example that's even crazier. I just looked at it this morning, and partly it'll play into our next show, but I'll bring this up now because it's so relevant. And on August 12th, 2022, there was a major assassination attempt in the United States against a world-renowned figure.
Okay.
Very nearly succeeded.
Well, I do remember an incident, but I can't remember who.
You would remember Salman Rushdie.
Okay.
You know what?
You mean, it was an actual attack. I thought you meant something that had stopped before it even...
No. And the reason that it's not top of mind is because it was taken out of the news immediately, right? That vanished from the news instantly. Compare it to what happened to Paul Pelosi, for instance.
Right.
And Rushdie is a much more significant international figure.
Yes.
He had a fatwa placed on his head since his book Satanic Verses came out in 1988. And that was, what are we talking, 30-something years ago.
Which was a gigantic deal. And
right.
The first fatwa anybody had ever heard of.
Right. And there were his Japanese interpreter was assassinated. His Italian interpreter survived an assassination attempt. He survived an assassination attempt. Boy, this tells you how the culture works in some strange ways. In 2009, not until 2019, when the what's what they call this guy? Khomeini. They changed their names a little bit. Ayatollah Ali Khomeini, whatever. Mm-hmm. Slightly different from the old Ali. But said that no, the fatwa was still on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Only then in 2019. I think Trump had already been kicked off. That they finally kicked off Ali Khomeini. So the fatwa was still on, right?
Yeah.
And here's why I know about this is because I have a summer home about 20 miles from where it happened at the Chautauqua Institute. And I was at the, about a week after the event, I was at the, and it's a rural New York State area, Western New York. I was at the local supermarket in that town, the county seat. And there was a guy in a suit in front of me. And it's rare to see a guy in a suit middle of the day in a small town. It just is. So I'm behind him in a line, the checkout line, and he starts talking to the clerk who knows him. And then as I'm listening to this guy is the public defender defending this guy's name. And I had to look it up today. I think it's Hadar Mati. It may be Mati Hattar. I forget. At the time, I'm thinking it's a week after the event. I follow the news closely. I don't know the name of the assassin. right?
Right.
But I wanted to get into the conversation, right?
The would-be assassin. Or...
Right. So I said, yeah. So I started talking about the attack with the public defender, and they're representing this guy, right?
Yeah.
And the town's called Mayville. It might as well be called Mayberry. I mean, the jail is like, as Don Knotts there, Barney Fife and Otis, I mean, it's a little county jail. That's where he's still being held. I said, can I go talk to him, right?
Wow.
And they said, well, no, we don't recommend that because he talked to the New York Post the other day and he got himself in trouble. So, but he is still being held in this little county jail. Then all news of this story has vanished, right? But here's a few days ago, they interviewed Rushdie's agent. And I followed because I was curious about the locale and all. I know Chautauqua Institute. And the agency, here's what the agent, this goes back to your point. This is crazy, but it goes back to your point. And the agent was talking about, first of all, here's the outcome, is that Rushdie has lost the use of his one eye, and the use of his right hand.
Right.
So it was almost fatal. And it was just by dint of other bystanders intervening that kept it from being fatal. And of a major international figure. There's someone who's known worldwide. And no one knows this. No one cares. No one knows because they had to get it off the news because it's not the story it's not the agenda they like. But Andrew Wiley, I think his last name is Wiley. I think it's Andrew. His agent is talking. And then he says, and here's the way they deflect. He said, this was just a random attack. They're just like the attack on John Lennon, right?
Yeah.
And, well, I remember the guy, Mark David Chapman is the guy who killed John Lennon. I know his name because they didn't try to hide his name. He was a loony. We get that, just like the guy in San Francisco was a loony. There's other loonies. They do stuff. Hinckley was a loony. He wasn't politically motivated. Maybe. And then Wiley goes further. But he goes, this is indicative of a larger problem. And I trace it back to
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, right. And other people like him spewing hate, blah, 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 blah. And he's going on. I'm thinking, this is madness.
Yes, I know.
This is madness.
And that guy that did it, the would-be assassin,
yeah.
The crazy thing is they let him go out and get drunk and come back in and let himself into the jail cell now and just lay in the, and, that's a Otis.
Yeah, yeah.
He's doing the Otis thing. They're all like, hey, Fahad.
Yeah.
It's all cool.
Honestly.
No, but they really wanted to take him out. And I mean, if you've got any grounding at all, you hear the story that he was assaulted, you knew exactly what it was.
Right.
It was a political assassination attempt.
On Sam and Rushdie.
On Sam and Rushdie.
Right. New Jersey man.
New Jersey man.
That's what they've headlined it. New Jersey man. Okay, yeah. Well, from Lebanon. Well, he's in New Jersey. I don't know how long he was in New Jersey, but he's from Lebanon, right?
Right.
And he wasn't doing it because Salman Rushdie said something bad about New Jersey. If that were the case, every comedian in America would be in risk of being killed,
And that's an interesting thing. Why this allegiance between the Islamic jihadis and the radical left of whatever we perceive that to be domestically.
Right.
They're in lockstep in so many ways you really have to start. You have to take a zero-base look at this and step back and go, what is this really? And this is where I get into the satanic thing.
Well, I mean, they have a common enemy, and that's Western Christian civilization. But think about this when they're putting together their multicultural Ten Commandments, right? You have one side that wants to celebrate gays, right?
That's right.
And the other side that wants to behead them. Where's the compromise? Solomon couldn't solve this problem. So what you have is a coexist bumper sticker.
That's right.
That exists only because they don't coexist, right?
And the problem, I think, is that we have abandoned subsidiarity. Everything has become a political football on an international scale.
Yeah.
That's how they use coercion.
Right.
That's how everything becomes a cudgel.
Right.
And that's why you can't ask questions about Paul Pelosi and why the underwear, the hammer doesn't make sense, and this 2 a.m. and the blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like, how stupid do you think we are?
Right. And the problem is, and then I'm going to close with this note because it's a cheery, optimistic note, is they've had this, relatively optimistic, I being the Pollyanna of the two of us, but for the last 10 years, essentially, they've had a total wall of containment. You're baffled. The room's been baffled,
Yes.
just like you said. And a crack has opened in that wall.
Yes.
And it's Elon Musk who's forcing it open. And they're panicking. They're panicking for fear that their own people will begin to see what we've seen for all these years.
Yes.
We know what they know, but they don't know what we know. And that is the ultimate fear right now. And the sense of panic at the possibility of exposure to alternative.
Because it is existential.
Yes.
They're gone. I mean, who knows?
Well, we'll find out. We'll find out next week when you and I re-meet, dear Roy, here on Upstream with Cashill and Edge. And thank you for joining us today on our premiere episode. And we'll be back.